Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Josh Hillis. Okay, so I feel like I do this at the start of every episode, especially when I have returning guests, but it's been way too long. I get excited, but I think that's more a testament to the quality of the people I've been able to bring on. So for the audience, if you're getting tired of me getting like, oh my God, I can't believe it's Josh Hillis. Well, yes, I kind of like that with all my guests, but of course you're an author. You've got a couple of books. You are what I consider to be the leading educator in the fitness industry, nutrition space on eating skills, emotional eating, mindfulness, that umbrella. And you were one of my most popular episodes when I had you back. It was quite a long time ago, so we're long overdue. Welcome back.
Thanks. I'm stoked to be back. It was a fun episode last time. It was really fun.
So let's dive right into the shit. Why
Let's do
can't
it.
everyone just rely on hunger to guide what they eat?
Oh wow. Because there's so many reasons. One of them being that so I'm going to take kind of like a different perspective. I have there was a time where I taught people hunger and fullness based eating, right? I worked with a dietitian who did that, and it worked to a certain degree. But a lot of my clients have busy schedules and they've got meal times that are going to fit in certain places. Their workout's going to fit in a certain place. It often works better to, instead of like eating to fullness and eating when hungry, to instead look at like, hey, I've got this meal now and this meal in 6 hours. What's going to be enough food to get me to the next meal? Right? Or like, oh, lunch got pushed way back. Actually, I don't need as much food to get to dinner. Like it can make sense to zoom out and look at your day, or to look at like when your workout fits, or like that. So sometimes actually, like you probably wouldn't want to eat to fullness like right before a workout, right? It might be kind of uncomfortable. So zooming out, and looking at your day is actually more useful for my clients a lot of the time. But in terms of just the skill of stopping when full, it's really hard when we're dealing with like high flavor enjoyment, right? So if someone's going to be eating a pretty balanced meal, like the proverbial like chicken and broccoli and rice, pretty easy to notice when full and stop. If someone's eating pizza, way harder. So if someone's eating pizza, it's probably way smarter to go like, you know what, I'm gonna have 3 slices and stop, and I'm gonna stop while I might still feel something that feels like hunger. I for sure feel a lot of wanting. And so I'm gonna actually like stop while feeling that food motivation, and probably also feeling a little bit of disappointment, and everything else that comes up around that. So yeah, for like highly palatable foods, it's great to just like set an amount
How
at a
do
reasonable.
people how do people differentiate between physiological hunger signals and the bored eating, oversimplification, of course, stressed psychological hunger?
Yeah. Well, so the enlightened answer would be like, what do I feel in my stomach? But sometimes it's easier to pair that question with a couple other questions. So first question, for sure, go ahead and check in with your stomach and say like, hey, what do I notice there? Do I notice an empty, hollow feeling? Do I notice some fullness? Do I feel nothing at all? Right? If I'm getting no information, that might not be hunger. Um, but then to pair that with questions like, do I feel hungry for a balanced meal? Or am I just like obsessing about a specific treat? That's a good one. Another one to look at is one of my favorite guideline is pause 10 minutes before snacking, or pause 10 minutes before seconds, or whatever. But if you pause, does that feeling grow, or does it fade, or stays, like what happens if I pause, right? And a lot of my clients will find that if they pause, they'll actually like forget, like that probably wasn't hunger, right? But if you're like, oh, you know what, like I wasn't sure what I felt in my stomach, and I wait, and I'm like, now I'm kind of getting a little bit of stomach growling, or I'm kind of getting like a little whatever sensations people notice in their body when they're actually hungry. If they're starting to feel more of that, that's probably hunger.
It makes sense Because if you think about it, how many times have we been hunger and we're craving something? I want to come to cravings in a second. And
Yeah.
then some other sort of dopamine driven stimulus hijacks us and catches our attention. Maybe it's social media, maybe you're watching something on television, et cetera. And all of a sudden, yes, you've forgotten about the quote
Yeah.
hunger. And then that's, to me at least, that's a clue that maybe it was like dopamine stimulus, novelty
Yeah.
seeking, as opposed to necessarily physiological hunger. Thoughts?
Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah, 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 totally. Actually, like one of the things I have my clients do is notice and name the um like the different internal experiences they're having. And a lot of times they'll say urge instead of craving because if they're like me, if I don't immediately eat the snack, or the treat or whatever, then like my next urge is like social media, right? I'm just like looking for something, right? Um, but um but so yeah, it could be that sort of like novelty seeking. I also have a lot of clients that have like super busy, high stress jobs, and they're have a lot riding on them and a lot of people that they're responsible for. And man, I can't tell you how many times they just need a break. Like they just go for a walk around the office, and like when they sit down, they're like, "Oh yeah, what I need was a walk, right?" Or like I need a couple minutes just like not staring at this problem. And so if a walk does it, obviously that wasn't hunger either, right?
I mean, this is off topic, but it relates to that. It's the incidence of smokers in workplaces
Mm,
traditionally, and how
right,
many people, like, I think it's sort of reported. I think this is like pretty established, certainly anecdotal from the non-smokers. They observed that the smokers would take more breaks, and the
right.
smoking became a mechanism to actually take the break. So,
Yeah.
does do people sometimes use food as a way to take breaks?
Every single client I get, almost, all I shouldn't say every, but a large portion of my clients, the only time they're willing to give themselves a break is when they're going and getting a snack. And so snacking has become this ability to give themselves a break. And some of them actually have a lot of resistance to giving themselves a break without going to get something. And so we get to like deal with that discomfort, right? We get to like sit with it. But yeah.
Discomfort. Okay,
Yes.
so like
I love
this feels like
discomfort.
we're really dancing around this, and it's like,
Yeah.
to what degree? I mean, I think we kind of know that very few people are good at sitting quietly in silence, discomfort. You reach for your phone automatically, right? To what
Yeah.
degree is food filling that inability for people to sit quietly with their own thoughts?
So there so to be clear, there are a lot of different client populations out there, but the people that hire me, it's that's big. That's really, 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 really big, right? It's food is showing up. Like the function of food is handling a lot of things that aren't hunger. It's either like needing a break, it's like feeling stressed out or overwhelmed, it's feeling sad, it's feeling angry, it's feeling tension. I've had clients that ate when they got cold. Like any kind of internal discomfort that we might want to avoid, food's remarkably good at masking that for a certain amount of time, right? There's so many other things that we could do that either take more effort or don't do quite as good a job as food. Like food's just easy and amazing for masking all kinds of discomfort. And so the only way out is through, right? Like if we want to get to a point where we're not stress snacking, we need to get good at sitting with our stress. And if we want to get good at not emotionally eating, we need to get good at being with emotions. And so that's kind of like another level, right? Where we're like, oh, you could go for this walk, right? Like probably you need a break at work, but also you might need a certain amount of learning how to be with the stress of your job. And ideally, like the highest level would be both. Would be like you're learning how to better sit with these emotions that are coming up at work, and you're taking a walk because you're a human and you actually need breaks instead of I'm taking this walk to distract myself from.
How do you get someone to start with this realization? Is to figure out, wait a minute, this snacking behavior that we're presuming that it's reached a point where it's leading to over calorie consumption. It may be on the
Yeah.
pathway to, or someone's already dealing with metabolic, you know, poor health issues. So how do you start that conversation to get them to look inward and go, all right, you got to get okay with a little bit of discomfort here with your spending time with yourself and your thoughts.
So I'm kind of known for that. Most of my clients, when they hire me, they're like, "Hey, I saw that post where you're talking about like finishing three cookies and sitting with the disappointment of it ending." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds real. That sounds like a real thing, right?" Or they're like, "Oh, I saw your reel about where you're eating that Thai food and you stopped at three-quarters of the way through because you were full, and like you were kind of pissed off you couldn't eat anymore." Right? And they're like, "Oh, that sounds more realistic than these other people I follow that are like, I just don't want anymore." Like they're like, "That's not me." They're like, "That's clearly not Josh." Right? So they're kind of looking for that. And so when we start, I mean, we dive right in. Like very first session, we're looking at a situation where they overate, and we're working through how to notice and name what's going on inside, right? Like what thoughts came up, and what can they name the emotions that came up, and what did it feel like in their body, and what they have an urge to do, and if they sit with that for a minute, then what comes up then, right? And if they sit with that for another minute, then what comes up then, right? And we start with just like noticing and naming what's going on, and um that can be really illuminating, right? That can be really illuminating. And the kind of like secret part is, if I'm having them notice and name two, three, four times in a row, then they're actually sitting with it for 3, 4 minutes, right? And this is all inside of, we already have the guideline of pause 10 minutes before snacking. That's the only thing. Everything else I do is based on research. Pause 10 minutes before snacking is the only thing I invented. And all of it sits inside of like, you want to have a snack, pause 10 minutes. We need a wedge in between wanting and having, where we can actually practice some stuff.
Okay.
And we've got those two things working together.
All right, I like that. So you mentioned emotional eating a whole bunch, and that's something that you're
Yeah.
great with. So I kind of
Yeah.
want to open the floor to, how where does someone start where they feel like they are struggling with emotional eating, especially the person who feels completely out of control and maybe even has an external locus of control narrative to say, well,
Yeah.
I'm an emotional eater. They've used the label, it's now part of their identity. Where do we start there?
So this is another thing that really helps. A lot of people that work with me are like, I'm an emotional leader, and like I feel like I'm broken. There's no one else dealing with, and like it helps to be like, well, actually, every single client I have is dealing with the exact, like you are for sure not alone. And the path forward is twofold. One, we start with the skills that we are just talking about, and two, we have to get really clear on their values, and not their values in the way most people talk about it. It's kind of like abstract thing, like find your why, and you're gonna know. No, no, no. We need to figure out like what kind of character strengths do you want to embody in your eating? And they might be like, oh, I want to be like wise and conscientious. Or someone else might be like, I want to be like balanced and mindful, right? Okay, so if we want to be balanced and mindful, let's take your stickiest food. And they're like, uh, donuts, right? The donuts in the break room. We're going to sit down, we're going to outline, hey, when does it fit balanced and mindful to eat the donuts in the break room? And they're saying like, oh, like when they have my favorite donut, right? When they have my absolute favorite donut. And actually, when my friend that I work with is eating a donut in the break room and I have it with them. Okay. And when does it not fit? When does it not fit? What did I say? Balanced and mindful? When does it not fit balanced and mindful to have the donut in the break room? They're like, oh, when I'm stressed out, when I'm just eating it because I'm stressed out, when I eat it while I'm working, when I grab one and I grab another one for later, when I eat it standing up, like then all of a sudden these values go from like these words that sound kind of abstract to like you've got a really clear, you're like, oh, I'm in the break room and they've got the crappy donuts that I don't like, and my friend's not there, and I'm stressed out, and I just needed a break. It actually doesn't fit my values to have it. And the important thing there is if we're gonna play the game of not eating that donut when we're stressed out or emotional, then we need to eat it when it does fit our values, when it does fit the kind of person. Like, I don't want to say you're never going to have a donut again, because that's the path to failure. But like this, we've got this like really clear situational criteria.
Mm.
Like, here's where it does fit. You need to eat it when it's a clear yes. And we need to work on the skills when it's a clear no. And when it's a clear no, you need to set a freaking 10-minute timer, and you need to go, am I going to sit with it? Am I going to do something to take care of myself? Or ideally, am I going to do both? And so to start, that's going to be like they're setting a 10-minute timer. They're like, oh, I'm in the break room. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm going to have it. I'm going to set a 10-minute timer. They walk back to their desk. They're like, okay, what do I feel in my body? Okay, I've got these thoughts about like I should have it, I shouldn't have it. I'm feeling super tight in my body. I'm kind of like a little bit angry that like I have to even have this conversation with myself about donuts. And like they'll like go through the thing like 2, 3 times, right? And then they get to a point where they're like, you know what, I think actually like I'm just trying to mask stress, and I've sat with the stress for a couple minutes. I'm going to go for a little walk to take care of myself, and then I'm not going to have it. Or they're going to say, hey, you know what? I know I'm using it to mask stress, and I'm going to eat it anyway, but I'm going to eat it after 10 minutes. And when they get to the end of the week and they're looking at the tracker, they're like, hey, my job this week to start, because you asked to start, their job was to pause and to check in. And if someone pauses and checks in for a couple weeks, we can layer more and more practice on top of that. And a month from now, 6 weeks from now, they won't be stress eating the thing. But to start, doesn't even just get the pause in, just get the check-in in, and you're doing good if you can do those two things.
There's a bunch of stuff here. So I know one of the questions I was going to ask, and we're going to get into this in a bit, is
Yeah,
values-based eating, and you just
yeah,
described that. So I hear a couple things. One is creating almost an aspirational identity. It's a frame I really like, and I think this goes into
yeah,
some of James Clear's stuff in
yeah,
Atomic Habits. And
yeah,
if you frame an aspirational identity, and I think the values aligns with this, is you're creating a set of, well, identity, who you are, and the way that you would want to act, and therefore you kind of pre-plan decisions based on certain circumstances. I'll give you guys an example
yeah,
that I've used a lot, and I've got an article on this. I can't count the number of times way in the past years ago, I go into a mall and there's always at mall Chinese food. Okay. And you buy the three items for, I mean, I remember back when it was like, fuck, I was in university, it was like three items for $5. And for, it
yeah,
used to be 10. Now it's like $13 or what have you, or even worse. And it looks really good. It looks good in the tray. It looks good on the sign. And what do you conjure? You conjure the really damned good Chinese food, like the really good stuff that costs way more that you order. Anyway, so I would always get this bloody Chinese food on impulse, and it was always mediocre. And you feel kind of after the fact. You're pissed you wasted the calories. You're pissed you wasted the money, and then of course you're also not satisfied. So what do you want to do? You want to go and have some sort of treat you really love later. You feel guilty about it. That's a whole nother ball of wax. But what I've trained myself to do is whenever I'm going into a mall in a situation like that, I always jokingly remember this example. I'm like, all right, I'm not going anywhere near this fucking Chinese food. But once every 6 months, I will treat myself to $100 order, just one meal. And I order what I think I'm going to eat, and I'm eating it for like 3 days, which is still great because I'm so full. And then I'm mad because it goes back. I'm mad because I can't eat it all in one shot. It's like you ever go to a buffet and you pay a lot for the buffet, and you're like starting to feel full too fast, and you're mad. That's funny because you reminded me of that. And
yeah,
so I've trained myself to go, all right, I've got, and this is a framework I use, is getting really clear on what are the things that you love, the treats you absolutely love, and what is a mediocre rubbish that we actually historically have eaten a little bit too much of, and then get super clear on that. Get super clear on the fact there's actually a lot of nutritious home cooked stuff we actually really like anyway. I would rather have that than the mediocre shit. Fill up on that. But then I've created room where I don't have to feel guilty or shame for enjoying. And my example for a while has been a Dairy Queen Blizzard. I really enjoy those. So I can create room in my diet for one a week. The calories fit. I sit, I slowly and mindfully eat it. And I feel no guilt. I actually feel physically pretty good. I do it after a workout, and I find that actually works really well. And I'm
Yeah.
satisfied. And across the week, I know that I get to have that. So other impulsive things when I'm feeling like, and I want to go back to cravings and hunger. Let's go cravings and hunger next. But if I've got a craving for something, I say, hey, don't I get this to look forward to. And I'm actually satisfied knowing that I'm not restricting myself. Now, earlier, cravings versus hunger. And it sounded to me like if people get clear on the fact that oftentimes what they think is physiological hunger is a psychological craving, a desire for a specific food. What's going on there?
Oh, actually, can I say one other thing first?
Yeah, sure,
Um,
absolutely.
just about aspirational identity.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want it to be that like so it is that exactly. And the thing that I always want to emphasize with people about making a values-based choice is like you can be that identity today. Like people tend to relate to it like, oh, 9 months from now, if I practice really hard, I'll be that person. No, if like the choice you make about dinner is either wise and conscientious or it's not. And if you make a wise and conscientious, you're wise and conscientious today, right? If you're wise and conscientious about that thing in the break room like you can be that today. It's every single choice. Even if you blew your last meal, you did something you feel like you overate your last meal. You feel like it doesn't fit your values. You can still be your values at the very next meal, right? And I just love that immediacy of it. I just love that it's right now.
That's a counter to, oh, I've blown it, fuck it mode, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. This is another one of those things that's really great about like goal perspective versus value perspective, right? um Goal perspective, someone might be like, hey, I need to be on like I'm gonna lose X number of pounds per week, and like I had this meal, I blew it, so screw it, this week's over, like I know I'm not gonna hit my goal, right? Whereas like values, like the kind of person you want to be, like the kind of person you want to be doesn't change regardless of if it's going well or going poorly, right? If someone's like, oh, I want to be a good parent or a wise parent or whatever, if they have a tougher day with their kids, they're like, ah, screw it, this week's over. I'm not going to parent for the rest of the week, right? Or like an emergency room doctor, if they do something wrong with one patient, they're like, well, no more patients today. Like the kind of person we want to be is more important when things are going poorly than when things are going well. So, like, if the game we're playing is wise and conscientious, what's the wise and conscientious choice after you had a meal where you overate? Oh, it's way more wise and conscientious to go back to eating what you were supposed to or what the plan was at the next meal, right? And so I love having these conversations about like who do you want to be when it's going poorly, right? That's I mean, because that's to me when I think of like who someone is, like it's someone that's the same person when it's going poorly as when it's going well, right?
Do you think that a lot of people, let me frame this, because the brain fog I've been dealing with lately, I've mentioned a couple episodes, sometimes
Yeah.
will glitch me a little bit. Do you think that people will seek and default to behaviors that reinforce an identity that this stuff is beyond their control and that alleviates them of the emotional discomfort of the choice, the action, and responsibility for the outcome?
I think it's even simpler than that. I think it's that when we feel bad, right? Like negative emotions tend to like narrow our heuristics and our choice making
Mm.
into things that we've done a lot, right? So right, when we feel bad about having overeaten, like it just like it narrows our perspective and we want to do this thing that we've done before. We go to the most habitual response, we go to the easiest response, we go to and so and that's kind of what negative emotions are for. From a functionalist perspective on emotions, negative emotions are supposed to focus us so that we like narrow our choice making so that we take this route that would be evolutionary adaptive. And
That's more about like going back to limbic brainstem type, people refer to as lizard brain or, fast and slow. So it's like the fast thinking systems, whichever analogy.
yeah,
I think the book Switch, it's the elephant and the rider. It's kind of the elephant instinctive behavior, right?
Yeah, if you go thinking fast and slow, if you go like under stress, under negative emotions, we think fast. That we just do. And it's not right. Like if a tiger's coming, like we don't want to consider a lot of options. We want to run away, right? And so like a lot of these things are super useful if they're a perfect match, and they're usually not. And so anyway, the thing is, we feel bad. It's going to narrow our perspective. We're going to probably do something that we've used to comfort ourselves before. If we want to think slowly, we have to slow down. So it really works to like set a 10-minute timer. Start checking in. What's going on? Don't get caught up in the thoughts. Like, don't just go like, thoughts. Like, notice the thoughts like a weather report, and then see what's going on in your body. And you're like, whoa, man, my my shoulders are hiked up into my ears, and I'm super tight in my like yeah, like and you know what, I'm feeling, sad or lonely or stressed out or angry, or and you're like, okay, if I'm feeling angry, I'm gonna need to go through this a couple times, like to even have a shot at thinking slowly. I need to spend some time here and be willing to feel this. And the more I'm willing to feel it, all of a sudden my perspective starts widening. I start getting a little more room to move. I start getting a little more ability to make a choice. Because the other thing that's really cool, like the coolest thing about emotions, is that we do have that prefrontal cortex that where we can actually like say like, is this emotion like is this thing I'm being pulled to do a match for the situation? Oh no, like my brain's trying to take care of me, but this isn't a match. And I need to slow down and widen and maybe take a look at my values.
So this makes so much sense now with stress eating. So is this the
Yeah.
primary thing that drives stress eating to make people to default to the narrow, safe, instinctive, and of course, we know from an evolutionary perspective, as you alluded to, what do people seek? High calorie, hyper palatable food, right?
Yeah.
Is that what's
Yeah.
going on with stress eating?
So that's part of it, right? That's part of it. But also humans learn in a very particular way, right? From a relational frame theory perspective, like a dog will learn like you have it do a trick and you give it a treat. That's direct learning, right? Humans learn by hearing things, and we can piece together abstract concepts and like networks of things. And so we can learn to associate like comfort and food. We can be taught that as kids. Or we can pick it up like, oh, you know what? I never did that as a kid, but in college I started eating to manage final, and then all of a sudden we start associating like, oh, and so we could say like, oh, you know what, like I was eating to manage the stress of finals, and then all of a sudden that like broadens to like I'm using that to manage all stress, right? And then you start getting other things that are tied together where it's really easy for us to learn that like, oh, like being liked is being thin, and you tie that together with like, oh, like eating this is like like eating too many carbs is like morally bad. And you've got like the bad feeling of like, oh, I ate too many carbs, and like, oh, that means people won't like me. And then like I can manage the stress with food, and you've got this like whole network of things. It's all kind of abstract, but humans, like in a way, like the fact that we can learn like that is what gives us like, inventing machines and poetry and calculus, and but it also has us like tie together all these things that can be really not useful. And so I hesitate to say that it's just that like physiological mechanistic thing.
Mhm.
It's also, wow, we have these whole like like hornet's nest of things we've learned that have gotten tied together over years of people saying things and telling us how to relate to our body and how to manage stress, and that we should like never feel bad emotions because everyone on social media is happy, and what I mean, like there's so many things that can get tied into this. But the solution is remarkably simple given how complex that can be. It doesn't matter what all of those thoughts are and the feelings that come up with them. We just need to like be there for them. Like if we can just let those things come up without being sucked into them, then we can broaden our perspective and start getting a little bit more of like our choice making ability back. And from there, we can make a choice based on our values, regardless of all the different rules we've been taught, whether that's rules about body or food or stress, or that we learned to manage stress with food when our parents gave us cookies when we were crying.
And you said something in there, and I think it's worth highlighting. I'll elaborate on it. People, we our belief systems and our knowledge is based upon our experience of the world we grow up in. And I think as a kid, if we think about this, we feel like, well, everybody had the same frame and everybody had the same worldview. And I mean, not the same at all. I mean, different cultures,
Not
different
even
parts of the
close.
world, different languages, different religions, across the board. You're getting people. And on a broad macro scale, we sometimes struggle to understand, well, why do people believe this? Whether it's, and I avoid politics at all costs, but why do people have these socio-political beliefs? Why do people have these religious beliefs? Why do people have these cultural beliefs? Because we can't
Yeah.
step into that frame because we only know from our experience. So let's take that down to nutrition. I actually need to write this article. I was very lucky. My parents were incredibly forward thinking. So I'm going to be 47 very soon. I will be by the time this episode airs. And so I grew up in rural Newfoundland, and my mom and dad encouraged me and my brothers to be active in sports. They're really supportive. Yes, it was a different environment. It's rural Newfoundland. We were free range kids. We drank from the hose. All of the stereotypes. It's real. It's true. Okay. I played with GI Joes and Tonka trucks outside. We played guns in the woods. But they also got us involved in cross country skiing young. Dad gave me access to hockey equipment. I didn't take to it. We played every sport under the sun. Me and my brother, one of my brothers, we played a lot of basketball. But at the same time, we're also, and I had the fortune of, a lot of home cooked meals. Okay. So we had oatmeal for breakfast most weekdays. We would have, some sort of homemade lunch. This is rural Newfoundland. There's literally no McDonald's anywhere. That wasn't even an option. Mom mostly made home cooked dinners. Dad would grill steak sometimes. And every once in a while, it would be something that's a bit more processed. And there was a boundary around, back then I would get $5 allowance and I could get, I sound like a boomer here, but this is literally the thing. A bottle of, a glass bottle of Coke or Pepsi or whatever the hell I wanted, root beer,
Yeah.
a couple of chocolate bars, a bag of chips, and I would still have some change left over. And I don't know if my parents they couldn't possibly have known how principle based this is, but this is just the environment they created for us. So at a healthy boundary around, we're not drinking Coca-Cola for dinner every day. It's not for lunch, whatever. We also could have a bag of chips sometimes for recess in school. But if you
Yeah.
zoom out, that was what was normal to me. That's not what most people's normal was. And
Yeah.
it's not about blaming parents. I'm very grateful for who my parents were and the environment they created. I had that luck. I had that good fortune. But a lot of people didn't have that. And a lot of parents were still doing the best they could. Here's my other favorite thing that I want you to go into this. We have all had that thing where, mom and dad did pizza or we went to A&W because once we got into St. John's, whatever, it's like, hey, A&W. And you realize that no, they were just really tired. And they were doing the best they could. They probably didn't have half a clue because my parents literally growing up, they seemed like superheroes. They had all the answers. They were good. They had it on lockdown. And then listen, I don't have any kids, but I kind of look around the world. I'm like, I'm still figuring shit out. I realize that my parents in their late 20s, when I was a little kid, had no fucking clue what was going on, but they did amazing. So this is more like a celebration of how awesome my folks are. And
Yeah.
a lot of where I am in life is probably a product of these things and recognizing that not everybody had the same experience. So now back to you, take this on a principle level.
I think you kind of nailed it, right? Like you're talking about, like it's hard to imagine what things are like. Like every client I get knows someone who just like naturally stops when full and like has one cookie and is like, that's cool. And like all of them, they grew up like their parents like ate slowly and stopped when full, and like they'd have dessert sometimes, but then they'd like have just a, like, and that was just normal. Like it isn't a hard skill for them to learn because it was just always there. It was the water they were swimming in. And people who hire me tend to be in the exact opposite boat, right? Either their parents taught them to use food for to manage emotions, or more likely their parents started them dieting early, or their friends started them dieting, or like they started some sort of like rigid rule-based diet at 12 or 15 or 20, and they basically like white knuckled some kind of restriction, until they snapped and overate, and then it became this like cycle of like restricting because that was good or would work out socially or something. And then they'd snap and they'd eat, and that would like feel good and feel comforting and feel like a release. And like, so that's another way of learning, like, oh, like eating the stuff feels good and restricting is like what a good person does, and like this like constant like battle back and forth, you know. Um, but um, but I think you nailed it. It's a kind of I've heard it said that it's a kind of generational wealth if your parents were actually like
Mm.
active and ate like fairly reasonably, you know. Because you get all the skills without having to like fight everything everything you learned to get there.
Here, here's another thing that adds on to what you were saying. It's the kids who grow up who they hear mom and dad maybe, and maybe stereotypically it's a little bit more women, but I know men can be afflicted by this too. But mom, for this example, uses a lot of language about what we traditionally call diet culture. They observe a lot of dieting behavior from mom, even if it's not necessarily like taught to the kids directly. The kids pick up
Yeah.
on it. There's, sorry, let me get my train of thought again. They learn to equate, and you alluded to this, their value as a person with their leanness and smallness. I work
Yeah.
with clients who literally had like moms who like told the daughters this shit
Said
straight
that.
out. And here's a frame I like. I like to think about these as artifacts. These are beliefs that you may have grown up with and been indoctrinated within and adopted, but are they truly your own and are they actually serving you? And I like this frame because then it allows you to say, this is actually not, this doesn't belong to me. And it's the starting point of letting it go. Thoughts?
Love it. I could not possibly love that more. Like I love that 100%. So again, coming to back to like a relational frame theory perspective, we're given we're like in that case we're like given this connection, right? That like value equals weight, right? And also from a relational frame theory perspective, there is no delete key. There's no like getting rid of this thing you were taught. You know, it doesn't disappear, but you can totally recategorize it. You can totally reframe it. You can totally, like you said, like it's an artifact, or and so like that way when it pops up, because it may pop up for another year or 10 years, the rest of your life. You may still have those thoughts, but you can relate to it like that's the absolute truth, or you can relate to it like you said, like an artifact, or like this is a, or like, oh, that's a lot of times my clients will just label it as like, oh, that's a diet thought, or oh, that's a perfectionist thought, or oh, that's a like societal standard of beauty thought, or oh, that's something from my childhood, right? Where it's not going away. You don't even have to fight it. You don't have to change it. You can just be like, oh, there's that thing that there's that thing again, right?
It's almost like allowing it to pass through you without judgment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Cause like if it's like if I have this thought that's like, oh, here's this thing that I used to think that's no longer useful, it can show like I can have unuseful thoughts pop up and be like, oh, there that is, right? And I just go about my day. And so that's in the research on contextual behavioral science and eating behavior, that's kind of like the more effective way to go. Usually, I well, how much do I want to step into that? All right, I'll say that's a really effective way to go. It's really effective to take those previous thoughts and just recategorize them as like a, and so when you're playing the game of like I need to make this choice, like, oh, I feel bloated. Am I going to crash diet today, or am I going to keep eating balanced meals and stop when full and not stress eating? Then you actually play the exact same game. You can like pause 10 minutes before crash dieting, right? And you can notice a name, you know, like those thoughts. You can say like, oh, those are like the crash dieting thoughts. I used to do those, but I don't do those anymore. Now I'm being balanced and wise, right? What's the balanced and wise choice? Actually, you know what the balanced and wise choice is actually to have a balanced meal for lunch and to stop when full and to not eat the donuts in the break room when they've got the crusty old ones that I don't like. You know, like um so yeah, I love that. because it makes sense from a relational frame theory perspective or contextual behavioral science perspective, and it's worked really well for my clients. It's worked much better for my clients to reframe that or rename it or relabel it rather than trying to make it go away. Um, Chance of it going away are slim.
Are there any other critical aspects of values-based nutrition here? Values-based eating.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, so when most people, so if someone was listening carefully, they might notice that the things that I said, like patience and wisdom and conscientiousness and balance and mindfulness and self-compassion and joyfulness and like these are all ways of being. These are all character strengths. They're not standards. They're not goals. So it isn't like, oh, I didn't reach my so the issue is that the mistake most people make, like I'm using the word values in a very specific way, a very
Mhm.
contextually behavioral science way, where I'm really talking about character strengths. I'm not talking about domains of life. People say like, oh, my value is health. Well, what does health become? Health becomes a standard where they're like, oh, I need vegetables at every meal, or I need to have no, like whatever they think health means, it becomes like a rule. And so if someone wants to play the game of, they're like, oh, I want to work on health. Okay, who do you want to be inside of health? Oh, I want to be wise. I want to make wise choices about my health. And why that matters is if we have a standard, the standard's generally going to be like always no. When can you have that blizzard, Andrew? Never, because you've got health as a right. Whereas if you're being wise about your health, you're like, oh, you know what? Actually, it's wise for me to have that blizzard once a week because then it helps me manage the rest of it. Like so go to like character strengths rather than domains of life, and then also character strength instead of goals. Again, it's not something that you should be able to that you feel like you need to like work for months to get to. If the game you're playing is being wise, you can make a wise choice tonight, right? It's immediate. Um, and then how much time do we have? There's so much about values. One other thing is just that the values perspective and the goals perspective aren't mutually exclusive. The issue is when people make it. It's like for most of my clients, they have goals, right? They actually have goals, right? And most of the values-based choices they're making, we'll say 80%, are the same choices that move towards their goals. But then they run into a choice where like goal is going left and values are going right. If they abandon their values to go towards their goal, that's the path to that's the path to destruction. No, that's the path to like feeling restricted and rebounding for the kinds of clients that I get. For the kinds of clients that I get. So
It it sounds like it's
and,
it's
and
maybe
it,
winning a battle, but you're gonna set yourself up to lose the war in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's again like could like let's say you had a weight loss goal. Would you make it to that goal faster without your one blizzard a week? Sure. But like does it like I mean there's part of me that's like would that even be noticeable, right? But also like but it would be like abandoning this enjoyment that you get in this part of it, and that like you want to be the kind of person who can have a blizzard once a week, right?
Yep.
You want to be a kind of person who can have the delicious Chinese food when you order the really nice stuff, right? Like, um, so anyway, that's just the last thing I'll say is you can have goals and values. Don't abandon your values to hit a goal 10 seconds faster. It's not worth it.
There's brilliance and wisdom in this, and I mean, it's fun to see how excited you are about this, how passionate you are. So, right? And I hope that rings through everybody who's listening, Spotify watchers. And I can't promise, but I actually going to look at putting these up on YouTube. So if you're watching this after effect on YouTube, here we are, right? So, I mean, my first thought is like, are you going to write another book that gives all this stuff the treatment or?
Oh, so I'm trying to figure that out right now. I'm trying to figure that out right now. Right now I kind of have my hands full with clients with clients and get, like the content for socials and YouTube and like
Which is
but
great, by the way. Everybody, we're gonna shout this out in a second, but everybody does need to follow your social media.
Thanks, dude. But I do have the book outlined. I do know what it should look like. Um, I have a place to go to do it. But it's also just wow, is it a huge chunk of time, to do well? So not anytime soon, but yes, it would kill me to not put it out.
Good, because again, like I said, there's so much like context and passion and insight. There's been a couple of lightning bolt moments for me in this stuff and connecting things. I'm like, ooh, especially the link between narrowing and stress. It's like I never thought of that before, but it makes so much sense. And so the underlying message, this entire thing can almost be summarized as pause, give yourself 10 minutes, zoom out, right? Is that the big
Yeah,
takeaway?
yeah, yes,
Because you
yes,
said several times, doesn't matter all of these other circumstances, the solution, at least in this context, can be the same. It's very simple.
yeah, yeah. And if people just start with pausing, it's amazing how much work they can do in that pause, right? But like to start, if they just get the pause, that's awesome.
And I got a feeling that it goes beyond the scope of this conversation, but pausing can also probably be the pattern interrupt, because that's what we're doing, is we're really kind of doing a pattern
Yeah,
interrupt to get
yeah,
people to deal with other maladaptive things. I'm not even going to touch addiction on this one, but certainly if maybe you're fighting to get your ass to the gym or other sort of
yes.
lifestyle things, right? And maybe it is, I mean, one of the things I found, get a cat. It's wonderful because if Ozzy's sitting on my lap, one of the biggest hacks I can find is throw my phone out of reach. And then Ozzy's there, so I can't touch the phone to scroll on social media, right? So you can sabotage yourself. Actually, a simple thing of getting phones and laptops and tablets and shit out of the same room as you're trying to work in is timeless productivity advice. So
Yeah,
we can get people to follow you at Joshua Hillis.
yeah.
What other resources? So you got a couple books. You haven't written this one yet. Where do you want to send people to do a deep dive into your stuff?
So best like so my Instagram is the best place to catch me right now, at Joshua Hillis. The second book, Lean and Strong, Eating Skills, Psychology, and Workouts is the place to go right now. It has it's if there is a flaw with Lean and Strong, it is that it is overwritten. There is too much about the research. But there is the very beginning of the book has a 20-page like Cliff Notes version of the book for the rest of the book. So just
Mhm.
start there.
But I was just, for the audio people, I was just holding up my copy that's in my bookshelf behind me. So obviously, I fully endorse. I think it's a wonderful book, and I encourage you guys all to deep dive into Josh's stuff. That's why I brought you on and brought you back, and I'm going to make sure there's not as much of a gap this time. I'm also going to probably talk to a few people I know to get you on some other podcasts to spread the wealth of knowledge. So I enjoy
Thanks,
you
dude.
tremendously. So, and if you're someone who has found my media through Josh, well, I've got a lot of other great episodes recently. There's a bunch of good nutrition
Yes.
ones. So dig in there. I've got, not too long ago, I had Dr. Crystal Guevara on about Ozempic, which is, of course, a big hot button topic. And Dr. Alan Bacon on a lot of the supplement side of things. And my friend Dan Feldman, there's another deep dive in nutrition. So I think you guys will enjoy that stuff. And for everybody who's ongoing listeners, go follow Josh. And then the podcast downloads, the response to this has been incredible. I've been getting a lot of messages, a lot of people sharing on social media. So guys, just thank you. If you've been a long time listener and you still haven't messaged me, message me. I actually want to hear from you, okay? But keep sharing it with the people in your world. It helps me grow this. And if I can continue to grow this, I can continue to show up with amazing guests, bring them back. So Josh, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate you. And everybody listening,
Thanks so
thank you
much for
again.
having me, dude. This is great.